What is up, fellow monkeys? About a month ago I announced that I will try a high-frequency, low-intensity hangboard training routine inspired by another climbing YouTuber called Emil Abrahamsson. To be fair, I think originally it was his brother Felix who came up with the idea after reading a paper on ligament tissue recovery, so yeah, just to give credit where credit is due. Emil shared his results though, and they were impressive, so I got motivated and recently completed it. So it's time for a report. To make my own results as objective and measurable as possible, I conducted a specifically designed finger strength assessment session before and after the experiment. The goal of this video is to share and discuss my results, therefore hopefully providing a valid data point for the climbing community and give potential future experimenters an impression of what they can expect. I will start by explaining the session pattern I used, the methods, so to speak. I always started with a quick mobilizing routine and 3 or 4 short 2-second warm-up hangs on the Beastmaker 2000 jogs and the smaller 14mm edges, grabbing both half crimp and 3-finger drag style to wake both grip types up. Due to the relatively low intensity, a more intensive warm-up was not necessary for me. Then I started my stopwatch. First hang was a 14mm edges half crimp for 10 seconds at around 80% body weight, which I loaded all hangs with, which meant for me that I would simply bend my knees and rested my feet on the ground without using force. I measured this out with a scale at the beginning of the regimen to make sure I won't go too high or too low with the intensity. I will say though that as the regimen progressed and I got more confident on some of these hangs, I would sometimes also simply hang with up to 100% body weight, especially on bigger holds. All hangs were followed by a 50-second rest before the next hang started. The second hang was the 10mm Beastmaker Micros half crimp, again 10 seconds hang, 50 seconds rest. Next came the 8mm Beastmaker Micros half crimp and then the 6mm Beastmaker Micros half crimp, except if I'd have bad skin from other climbing, making the 6mm quite painful, then I'd do the 8mm for a second time instead. Next came an isolated middle 2 half crimp and an isolated front 2 half crimp, both on the 14mm edges. That's it for half crimping. Now onto the 3-finger drag, starting again with the 14mm edges. Those were followed by 2cm radius edges, which are holds I made myself from rods having a semicircle as cross section, practical for training open grips because they don't allow using friction like other more in-cut holds and thereby are more skin sparing. Next, the 1.5cm radius edges, followed by 1cm radius edges, all 3-finger drag. Then an isolated middle 2-finger drag and an isolated front 2-finger drag, both on the 14mm edges, and finally a middle finger mono pull on the lower Beastmaker 2000 monos. In between the last few hangs I also pulled my pinkies a bit to activate them as well. So that's 13 hangs in a 13-minute session. If you've seen Emil's video, you might have noticed that it's a bit more volume than his original pattern. He did 10 hangs in a 10-minute session, simply 3 times half crimping the 14mm, then 3 times 3-finger dragging the jogs, followed by middle and front 2 half crimp on the descent 2 finger pockets, and finally middle and front 2 finger dragging the descent 2 finger pockets, pulling the pinkies in between. The reason why I incorporated smaller holds is that I thought more variety would probably not hurt, and yeah, I had them on my home hangboard, so why not? However, I would only have access to these holds when we were at home, obviously, and as you can imagine, this was not always the case during that 30-day period. When I wouldn't have sure access to my home hangboard, I had my portable hangboard with me as a backup. This gave me access to one around 10mm edge wherever I was to conduct a normal, original Emil style session involving 10 hangs as I described above when necessary. So for the sake of full transparency, not all my hangboard sessions had the same structure. In total I did 48 hangboard sessions over the course of 30 days, 33 of which at home involving the 13 hangs and the other 15 on the go on my finger schinder involving the 10 hangs as described. On top of that I did 12 normal climbing sessions during during that period, lead and bouldering, all exclusively outdoors, which together with the hangboard sessions put me at 60 sessions and therefore exactly 2 sessions per day on average. I always followed the rule of at least 6 hours of rest in between sessions, whether it was hangboarding or actual climbing, measured from the end of one session to the beginning of the next. Alright, enough methods, time to look at the results. Let's compare the finger strength assessment sessions conducted before and after the experiment. In case you're interested in how I designed these, I won't go into much detail now since this video is probably too long already. I shared the thought process about a month ago on another video and explained everything, including stuff about the experiment, in much more detail on my Patreon. Before comparing my test hangs, I want to make clear that I conducted both test sessions in comparable conditions. My training weight was 66.0 kilograms before the experiment and 66.5 after. In both cases it was a fasted morning session after one rest day, and on these rest days I had a high carb low fat dinner. As you can see in the session protocol, everything from warming up to hang timing to bonus weight is specified to keep comparability as high as possible. The strength indicator I tracked was solely hang time because it is hard to track variable bonus weight in a controlled fashion in my experience. The first 5 hangs were all done on the half crimp grip. If you want to learn more about grip types, you can check out my video on gripping technique. First comes a one-handed Beastmaker 2000 middle edge hang, on which I could hang for around 1 second with my weaker left hand and around 3 seconds with my stronger right hand before as well as after the experiment, so no significant changes there. Continuing both-handed, I tested a weighted 14mm hang with 10.8 kilograms of bonus weight. Here I increased my hang time by around 20% from 39 seconds to 48 seconds. Next came a weighted 10mm micro hang with 6.8 kilograms of bonus weight. Here I increased my hang time by around 16% from 30 to 35 seconds. Then a bodyweight 8mm micro hang on which I got 34 seconds before and 36 seconds after the regimen. Some gains but below 10%, and I'd say changes below 10% are not significant. Imagine other non-influenceable factors like sleep or air humidity, which can easily cause comparable changes but have nothing to do with actual fitness gained or lost. Next, a bodyweight 6mm micro hang on which I increased my hang time by over 100% from 6 to 13 seconds. The following hangs were done both-handed on the 3-finger drag. First I tested my 2cm radius edges at body weight. Here performance dropped by around 30% from 27 to 21 seconds. Now the same edge with 6.8 kilograms bonus weight. Here I hung for 14 seconds before and after the regimen, no significant changes. Next, 2 1.5cm radius edge hangs at body weight. First attempt performance dropped by around 30% from 9 to 6 seconds, and on the second attempt I had no changes, around 11 seconds before and after the regimen. Now onto the smallest 1cm radius edge, where I couldn't even properly lift my feet from the ground before as well as after the regimen. Now some middle 2-finger drag hangs, first on the 2cm radius edges, where performance dropped by 45% from 10 to 5.5 seconds. Then I had 2 attempts on the very bad slopey Beastmaker 2000 2-finger pockets, which I could not lift off on at all before and after the regimen. And finally a middle finger mono test, 14 and 15 seconds before and after the regimen respectively, no significant changes. Overall it can be said that while half crimp performance improved slightly, especially on very small holds, 3 and 2-finger drag performance dropped slightly, especially on bigger holds. Time for a bit of discussion, and then I'll finish the video off with some anecdotal impressions and recommendations. When it comes to the one-handed middle edge hang, Emil's massive gains surprised me because he did not even grab this hold during his sessions, neither did I, yet his performance on it seemed to have been affected very positively. One could assume that because he acquired massive small edge performance gains as well, like I did to some degree, that simply carried over to bigger holds, but unfortunately this was not the case with me, so I cannot confirm that. It was also quite surprising to me that his small edge performance increased so much, given that he didn't touch any very small edges during his sessions. Overall, judging from his results, one could assume that a wide range of finger strength was covered and improved by a surprisingly simple routine. Anyway, I think I can pretty much pinpoint what caused my small edge gains, at least on the half crimp, and that was a significant improvement of skin and general rigidity, especially in the fingertips. Already 10 days into the routine, I noticed that my fingertips became a toughly malleable, rigid mass, especially when chalk was added, an expectable consequence when stimulating it frequently with very small edges. This is an effect I described in a video about micro hangboarding a while ago. I also noticed that the small hold test hangs were significantly less painful during my second assessment, although I held on for much longer. To some degree, this could also explain the performance drop on the 3 and 2 finger drag, seeing as drag grip performance is generally more friction dependent, and super tough fingertips are not exactly what yields ideal friction, especially on smooth wooden holds. But I think that's only part of the explanation. When starting the Emil method experiment, I came out of a repeater cycle during which I trained my 3 finger drag intensively, comparably more than my half crimp, because the 3 finger drag is my weaker grip. I documented this on the channel as well. I think that my 3 finger drag was exceptionally fit when starting the Emil method, and the low intensity stimuli, although high in frequency, were not enough to keep up this fitness the same way as it did keep up and even improve my half crimp fitness. Let's move on to some final thoughts. What could be the purpose of such a regimen? After my experience, I can't really confirm this first impression notion of outstanding strength gains for a relatively low investment. What I can say is that my fingertips got significantly tougher, which could be helpful, especially on some small-holded, hard outdoor climbing. But I think that is to some degree because I incorporated very small holds in my routine, deviating from the original routine. Who knows if I'd have seen this effect on the original routine. I also cannot confirm a significant rehab effect which has been propagated by some, rather the contrary. About halfway into the routine I developed a little pain spot below my left shoulder, which thankfully left me again towards the end of the regimen, but to be honest I can't claim that was caused 100% by the regimen. I explained this in more detail on the Patreon. My fingers did not become thicker, stiffer, more rigid or healthy feeling in general, apart from the fingertips. In fact, since I started the regimen, I've been getting emails and messages from climbers who tried it as well, and a great chunk of them had to stop somewhere halfway in due to some issue they had developed, mostly fingers, elbows and shoulders. Of course, this is anecdotal. I think with low intensity routines like these, it's very tempting to hang a little harder and then overdoing it in the long run. I don't know how well they executed the regimen. The high frequency is not to underestimate though, because you get very little rest, and I think you have to be especially careful if you're on the older side. Maybe for you the propagated 6 hours of rest should be in fact 10 hours. Who knows how old the engineered ligaments of that study were. And if you're still on the not so adapted side of the sport, in other words if you're still a beginner climber, be careful as well. A potentially useful effect I did discover though, more or less by accident, which I don't want to leave unmentioned. We made a 1-week trip to relatives during the 30-day period where I did not do any climbing, but I had my portable hangboard with me and did all my sessions according to plan. To my surprise, once I got back on my projects, I did not feel any decrease in fitness. Actually, I had a pretty good session right out the gates, as if I never stopped projecting. It seems this regimen is exceptionally able to carry fitness over periods of forced breaks, because it preserves skin and finger strength to some degree for a relatively low investment. Speaking of a low investment, is it really? The amount of time spent per session might be little, but let's assume the minimum of 2 times 10-minute sessions per day. That's 140 minutes per week. In other words, over 2 hours. And that is what I get to on any of my other hangboarding routines, training only 2 times per week for 1 hour each. One could claim that 2 sessions of 1 hour each are more plannable and therefore more executable than 14 sessions of 10 minutes each at a relatively tight schedule due to the minimum minimum resting time. On top of that, it can be annoying to always carry this duty in the back of your head, like, remember, I still need to hang today evening and stuff like that. You always have to be close to a hangboard or carry something portable, a chalk bag and a brush with you, which can be hard or plain impossible for some people. I mention this because if I learned one lesson from writing training regimens for lots of different people, it is that the most important factor deciding whether a regimen is completed or discontinued is not intensity or frequency or types of exercises, but it is executability, that is the compliance of the regimen with one's everyday life. Having all that said, can I recommend it? Will I do it again? I can't really recommend it for beginners because of executability reasons and the potentially high risk of injury. I can't really recommend it for advanced climbers because, at least for me, it doesn't yield fitness gains that are more significant than what would have been possible through different methods, while the overall investment is not smaller. I can imagine myself doing it again when I'm confronted with a forced climbing break and I want to carry my fitness over, or maybe if I want to quickly build up some skin, but then I'd probably keep it shorter than 30 days, 10 days were enough for that. And that's it for my 30-day Emil Method high frequency hangboard training experiment. Drop a like if you've got something from it and share your experience down below. I and other climbers would very much appreciate that, I'm sure. Stay strong and healthy out there, and I'll see you soon in the next one, my friends. Bye.